Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Capital Planning Commission and our commission chambers here tonight. My name is David Zayden. I'm a senior urban planner here with the commission. And one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is the federal environmental element of the comprehensive plan for the national capital. We're in the midst of updating the entire comprehensive plan, or at least the federal elements of the comprehensive plan, but the focus tonight is on some of the work that we've done for the federal environment element. And so we'll give you plenty more background as we move forward with this. But thank you all for coming, and we'll try not to keep you too late tonight. Okay, so why we're here. Did I do that? Sorry. So again, we're here to discuss the updates to the federal environment element of the comprehensive plan. We are in the midst of doing our audit of the existing elements, and the commission just released for a 60-day public comment period our audit to the environment element. So this is just an open house just to kind of present this to the public and to get some input from you directly on the policies. But really the public comment period runs for 60 days until August 10th. And so if you don't have anything to say to us tonight, feel free to contact us after the meeting, either through email or however you'd like to express your ideas and your comments to us. But beyond that, we also want to talk a little bit more about what the federal government and NCPC is doing related to environmental activities. One of the specific areas that we've focused on in this update to the environment element is climate change. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the activities that we've been working on outside of the comp plan that deals with that issue, as well as some other environmental issues. And Diane Sullivan will be addressing those in the presentation. Okay, so just to give a little bit of background about comprehensive planning in Washington, it's very unique compared to how comprehensive planning is done in other cities around the country and around the world, frankly. By law, the comprehensive plan for the national capital is divided into two pieces. There are the district elements, which is done by the District of Columbia and reviewed by NCPC, and deals with typical local planning issues such as land use, housing, economic development, and things such as that. And then there are the federal elements, which NCPC is responsible for. And this deals with establishing policies that relate to the federal government within the National Capital Region and the District of Columbia. And that's what we're talking about tonight, is the federal environmental element for the federal piece of the comprehensive plan. Even though they are two distinct elements, they do need to work hand in hand to form the entire comprehensive plan. And they need to be updated kind of on a similar track. The District of Columbia recently updated the elements for their portion of the plan in 2010, and that came through City Council. NCPC reviewed that and concluded that there was no negative impact to the federal interest in 2011, and that portion of the comprehensive plan was just published by the district. We're a little behind the district in our update, but we began our review of the federal elements in 2010. In 2011, the draft transportation and workplace elements were released for public comment. And then just recently, we finalized the transportation element, and we've released the draft environmental element. So we are tackling all of these elements at once, and we hope to get these completed no later than early of 2013. So why update the environment policies in the comprehensive plan? Since the last update, which was 2004, there has been a tremendous amount of work regarding sustainability and environmental policy. This is particularly embodied in the Executive Order 13514, which is known as the Sustainability Order. The official title of that order is the Federal Leadership in Environment, Energy, and Economic Performance. This executive order has really set a really strong policy path for the federal government in managing the sustainability of its operations. And it's really important that the comprehensive plan reflect those goals. The comprehensive plan should be a living document, and the policies throughout it should be evaluated for their effectiveness. So that's another reason why we are performing this update. And also in the realm of environmental issues, there has been a lot of new science that has led to new policies beyond just what we've seen in the executive order. And we'll hear a little bit more about that tonight, but that also should be reflected in the policies in the comprehensive plan. Okay, some specific areas that we wanted to tackle that have kind of come online since the last update in 2004. In addition to the executive order that I just mentioned, the sustainability order, there have been a host of implementing policies that have come out to advance the goals of that order. The Council of Environmental Quality has issued guidance on greenhouse gas reporting for federal agencies, as an example. They have issued guidance on the sustainable siting of federal facilities. So there's been a tremendous amount of work policy-wise that we need to incorporate. There's also been some really strong local programs targeting the Chesapeake Bay and Anacostia River for cleanup, and particularly their watersheds. There's a very strong federal program for the Chesapeake Bay to clean up and manage its watershed, and the Anacostia River has seen a lot of regional work to help clean it up, and these policies should reflect those goals. In the realm of climate change, the Environmental Protection Agency has issued several reports substantiating climate change and its effects, and the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has issued its own report on climate change and its effects in the National Capital Region. So we wanted to address those as well. And also, again, the advances in scientific research and new best practices. The environment, like any other area in planning, is seeing a constant evolution in its best practices. And we want to make sure that the environmental element is up to date in that area. Okay, so what exactly is the comprehensive plan, and what do these policies kind of affect? The federal environment element itself provides policy recommendations on best management practices and goals for environmental stewardship for federal agencies. And it's essentially a goal document. It's policies that really set the target for what federal agencies should be striving to achieve. It's an aspirational document that really sets the stake in the ground on certain areas that we want to say we care about. And really the devil's in the details. It's text, which makes presenting it challenging. But I believe when you were being checked in, you were handed the draft policy elements. That's essentially what we're talking about tonight, are that policy language and whether or not it embodies what we're trying to strive for. So any comments that you have on that document is what we want to hear from you tonight and throughout the comment period. So to get into the element, there are 12 existing policy areas that deal with a range of environmental issues, from air quality, water supply, floodplains is a very important piece of this, all the way up through soils and vegetation and wildlife habits. Again, these are just aspirational areas where we say that the federal government should strive to achieve certain goals that deal with these issues and take into account their effects when developing federal installations, managing federal property, and doing any other policy that might affect the environment. In this update, we're proposing 3 new policy areas: light pollution, energy conservation, and again, climate change, which I've been mentioning. We think these are 3 emerging areas that the comprehensive plan should focus on, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail on that in just a second. So again, the policies in the element are embodied in the document that you received coming in this evening, so I don't want to read those verbatim to you. I want to talk about a little bit about what the goals of those policies and what they're striving to achieve. So in the areas of floodplains, wetlands and watersheds, soil and wildlife, the main goals of the policies are to avoid any kind of interruption or development in these areas, to protect these areas as much as possible, particularly in the realm of wildlife. But if there is a need to develop in these areas or have some sort of activity in these areas, then to mitigate it as best as possible. In the realm of environmental justice, which essentially means how these policies are managed with the community, there are policies that establish the need for open evaluation of alternatives, and in essence reinforcing what is required in the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a federal law that many of you probably are familiar with, but this establishes pretty strong guidelines for how federal agencies need to communicate with the public and evaluate options in doing projects that might affect the environment. So this environmental element wants to reinforce those requirements. In the realm of solid waste and hazardous materials, there's been several documents and several policy areas that have been issued since the last update, and this is particularly embodied in Executive Order 13423, which was looking to really encourage the federal government to start recycling and reusing materials, and it set a 35% recycling standard for the federal government. Now, in the National Capital Region, the federal government has been doing pretty well. For example, in 2008, the GSA in the National Capital Region recycled over 8,500 tons of materials. So while we think that the federal government is doing pretty well, it can do better. And so the draft policies are really establishing goals that require reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting of solid waste, and to utilize organic and other biodegradable products as much as possible in its activities and operations. Another area is vegetation, and this area really focuses on the tree canopy and the tree quality in the National Capital Region. The District of Columbia, as an example, has a strong tree canopy. It's a very green city, and the tree canopy has increased 2.1% since 2006, with a current coverage of about 37.2%. The district has a goal of 40% coverage by 2035, which it seems should be able to meet, and it's doing pretty well. And our policies want to reinforce the need to preserve and protect the tree canopy in the region. The policies focus on preserving and expanding the tree canopy, replacing trees and compensating for tree canopy when certain trees need to be taken down. But a really important aspect is to respect local standards and guidelines for tree protection. Some of you may know that a lot of jurisdictions through its zoning maintain overlays that protect trees, particularly in the District of Columbia. There are several overlays that establish protection guidelines for trees of a certain caliber, and we think federal agencies should respect those guidelines and maintain that. A new policy area is light pollution. There's been a lot of research done over the years on the effects of light pollution. The research suggests that it disrupts migratory patterns for animals, particularly birds. It weakens the cleansing of particulate matter in the atmosphere. A degradation in essentially darkness in the atmosphere prohibits the cleansing of particulates in the air. And essentially it wastes energy if you're using light that doesn't need to be on. The element does not say that there should be no lighting at all at night. It just says that it should be rationally used in a healthy way. So the policies establish goals to eliminate upward and horizontal spillage of light, to provide appropriate light controls so the lights are turned off when not being used. And this is already being implemented throughout the government in its interiors with automatic switches. And also respect the effects and impact of light on adjacent areas and surrounding context. This is really important for the kind of the urban design quality of Washington, D.C., and particularly areas around the mall, that lighting from certain areas does not compete with the iconic symbols of the National Mall. So this is what we're trying to achieve in light pollution. A new area is energy conservation. A lot of these policies stem from the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act, or EISA as it's known. And this really sets strong standards for the federal government in conserving energy in its operations and in its buildings. The draft policies look to reduce fossil fuel generated energy consumption by 55%. 30% of hot water use in federal buildings should come from solar energy. And again, many of these policies come from this 2007 federal law. And we're also encouraging district level energy planning. This is becoming a more widely used notion in the planning world, and it's particularly embodied in our NCPC's Southwest Eco District project, where we're looking at redeveloping areas of the Southwest Federal Center in a manner where the energy and the environmental improvements can be kind of used all together within the public space, and there is economies of scale in implementing those systems. And we think this is a policy that the comp plan should reinforce. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, another area we are adding to the comp plan is climate change. But before I get into the policies, I want to turn it over to Diane Sullivan to talk about some of the other work that we're doing outside of the comp plan related to this issue.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Diane, and as David mentioned, we are updating the comp plan and adding a policy section called climate change, and this will address actually both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and trying to reduce further climate change from occurring, but also dealing with the impacts of climate change, which is called climate adaptation. And so as defined by EPA, climate change is any significant change in the measures of climate, such as temperature, wind patterns, and precipitation, lasting for an extended period of time. And I think it's widely acknowledged now that climate change is occurring and that the cause is human activity from the burning of fossil fuels that release greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the potential impacts of a changing climate on society and the environment will be significant, and these impacts include more frequent heat waves, high-intensity rain events, rising sea levels, and prolonged droughts. And you can see here in this diagram, it might be a little bit hard to see, that when you're looking at very heavy precipitation rain events throughout the country, they've been tracking them between 1958 and 2007. And if you look there in the Northeast, where we have Washington, D.C., there's been a 67% increase in the amount of rain that's coming down in those heavy events. So this is indeed real. It is happening. And then we can also expect here in the National Capital Region that this region will experience increasingly mild winters and much hotter summers over the next century. I think we're feeling that already. We're projected to have less precipitation in the summer and more in the fall by 2080. We're trending toward more frequent heavy downpours, and we're at risk for maintaining a sustainable water supply by 2050. And then, of course, the Chesapeake Bay experienced a 1-foot sea level rise over the last century, and the Chesapeake Bay could experience another 2 to 3 feet by 2100, which would have a really large impact on this area. So while reducing greenhouse gas emissions remains our priority, we do have to start looking at the impacts of climate change itself and planning for it. And so that is, in fact, what climate adaptation is planning for the expected impacts of climate change. And this is a really big focus of a lot of jurisdictions and the federal government right now. We are all, it seems like everybody's working on climate adaptation plans and sort of studying the vulnerabilities of different areas and how we're going to deal with that. So, as David mentioned, President Obama signed Executive Order 13514 in 2009, and this really was a transformative shift in the way the federal government operates. We measure greenhouse gas emissions for everything that we do now, and we submit sustainability plans every single year. Actually, they're due this Friday, and we also, for the first time, are all submitting climate adaptation plans this year, which we'll look at for each agency implementing best practices for adaptation, and then we'll also talk about how different agencies are going to be building greater public awareness and maintaining dialogue and partnership with stakeholders. And so that's there's a couple of projects I wanted to give you a very high-level overview of today, where NCPC is doing that, working with stakeholders and the public in terms of dealing with some of the impacts that Washington, D.C. could see in terms of climate change. And the first two projects have to deal with flooding, which may not be of a big surprise. So Washington's geography, topography, hydrology, they all play a role in flooding risks. The downtown is the bottom of the topographic bowl here. It's at the confluence of two major rivers. We have 3 buried streams and a high water table. Development is located in the floodplain here, and our sewer system is old and has limited capacity. And so if you add the impacts of climate change, heavy rain events and sea level rise, it exacerbates an already very vulnerable situation here, resulting in possibly a lot of flooding in our downtown. So the first project is the 17th Street improvements as part of the Potomac Park levee. Now, this levee was authorized in 1936, operational by 1940, and you have the National Mall here. And basically, this whole area right here serves as a levee that protects the downtown area from flooding from the Potomac River. And so in addition to having that there's a berm actually that exists from 17th Street to 23rd Street. So that berm functions as the levee itself, but then we also have temporary closures that need to happen at 17th Street and 23rd Street to make that levee complete. And if it's not, if those closures don't happen, this area would flood in downtown DC. And so those closures usually look like this. You guys might be familiar with them. It's usually Jersey barriers and sandbags. And not surprisingly, after Hurricane Katrina, though that solution was deemed unacceptable, and NCPC, actually I should say, based on that solution, the sandbag solution, the whole area in blue was remapped as the new FEMA 100-year floodplain. And so this has big consequences for private property in this area. Certainly they have to get flood insurance now. It requires different types of building standards. And so NCPC worked with, pulled together a lot of different federal agencies to put together a solution that would actually remove that new designation. A more permanent solution, I should say. And so basically what that solution looked like, here you can just see it's located right here on 17th Street. And so here's the old floodplain and the new mapped floodplain. And this is a very sensitive area. It's on the wall, on the grounds of the National Monument, right next to the World War II Memorial. And so you can imagine how difficult it was for everyone to design something that was going to be permanent in this special place. And so if you look a little bit closer, what it ended up being is two curved walls right here with removable posts and panels across 17th Street. And I'll just show you what that looked like. And so there's going to be new landscaping around that, and it sort of berms up. And so basically this is the system down, and then now here's a more permanent system that can be put in when the river is rising. And then the other project with regard to flooding I wanted to just briefly talk about was the Federal Triangle Stormwater Drainage Study. And many of you might remember the June 2006 flood. I actually wasn't here to see it, but I've heard a lot of stories about it, and the pictures are just amazing. And basically, this actually wasn't from river flooding. This was from our storm sewer backing up, not being able to handle the capacity of a 200-year rain event. The city basically received more rain than you could possibly imagine, and more than the sewer system could handle in 6 hours. And this was the result of it. And we can certainly expect to see more events like this in the future, especially as climate change occurs. And so it caused a lot of damage to the federal buildings in the Federal Triangle, millions and millions of dollars worth of damage, and basically put a lot of our, these invaluable resources at risk that we have in cultural artifacts. And then, of course, roads were shut down and the electricity was out, and so it was also a big security risk and a lot of loss of productivity. And many of these buildings were closed for days. And so NCPC, working again with the Corps, GSA, DC Water, in the district, and just a whole host of federal and local agencies, put together the Federal Triangle Stormwater Study, which looked at different solutions. Well, actually, more importantly, it modeled this entire area, which has given us a lot of information about what we can expect in future storms in this area, and then also what solutions might actually work. And so I don't have time to go through all the solutions, but looked at low impact development, bioswales and things of that nature, looked at putting large cisterns under the National Mall that would actually take up multiple blocks. And then, of course, there's the more engineered solutions, which are the big tunnels and pumping systems and so on. And basically, I think the takeaway here is that actually none of these really rise above. I mean, some of them are incredibly expensive. Some of them are technically probably infeasible. And then like low impact development, which provides a lot of wonderful benefits, we couldn't do enough of it to hold this amount of rain in such a short period of time. So we really need to probably look at a menu of these, but I think the important thing that came out of this was actually all of the modeling that was done. So we can now, when we're building or doing work on individual buildings, we can plan for future flooding events. And so you see that here with the National Museum, African American Museum of History and Culture. And so they're putting in flood protection integrated into their perimeter security in the new design here. So they'll be ready for it. And just I want to mention that report is on our website if you're interested in looking at it more. And then the last project, which I love talking about, is the Southwest Eco District, which we already mentioned tonight. And we're having a public meeting on July 19th, so if you want to hear lots of information about it, come to the DC Office of Planning. But basically, this project has sort of created or looked at, modeled this entire area based on district scale planning. This is a huge federal enclave, a lot of federal office buildings, mid-century modern buildings that are very inefficient, and there's a lot of hardscape here. So all of the rainwater runs off into the storm system here too. And basically what we have done is in redesigning some of the buildings that are really at the end of their useful lives, we've created sort of a new eco district here, an area that captures, manages, and reuses a majority of its energy, water, and waste within this little district itself, and really proves that district scale planning is much better than planning at the individual scale. I'm just going to highlight water and energy here. The water system basically captures all of the water from all the building roofs, from the streets, and funnels the majority of it to cisterns under 10th Street. There is a lot of space there for cisterns, and so that water can then be reused for all of our non-potable water needs, which is fantastic, and especially since if we're looking at by 2030, because of climate change, having possibly a scarce water supply here, 2050, excuse me. And then the last part is we have a lot of district energy strategies that we have proposed for this area. There's an existing cogeneration plant which provides the heating and some cooling for a lot of the federal buildings in this area and beyond. It, with a little bit of upgrades, could be wonderful in terms of helping us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in this area, especially if we could also bring on some of the private buildings in this area. And then we have a lot of opportunities for solar, ground source heat, and sewer mining. And basically, if we do all of these, and I'm giving a very high-level overview here, but if we do all of these proposals and bring on new development onto the cogeneration plant, we've modeled this and we believe that we can reduce this area's greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. So that's a really big step forward, I think, for the federal government. So I appreciate you letting me talk to you a little bit about some of the projects that we have underway here, and I think David's going to wrap it up with the climate change section.
Thanks, Diane. And just to bring this back to the comprehensive plan, again, this is a new area that we're proposing related to climate change to help address some of these issues that we've been talking about. And the policies focus on long-range planning for flooding, runoff, and soil erosion and temperature extremes. And some of that long-range planning are some good examples are some of the things Diane's been talking about. Encourage sustainable building design, which is becoming almost kind of standard these days, but we think the comprehensive plan should reinforce that. Setting a zero net energy standard by 2030, which is embodied in other policies in the federal government. Encourage district level energy planning, such as the work we're doing in the Eco District. But also that the federal government should support analysis of the impacts of climate change on the National Capital Region. This is an aspirational statement saying that the federal government should remain active in this area and create partnerships with local and regional organizations to help monitor the effects of this issue and to address policies accordingly. Okay, so this is an overview of the draft element. Again, you have the policies with you. They were handed out at the check-in, and this is the kickoff of the 60-day comment period. So at this point, we just want to hear what you think. If you have any areas that you think we should research more, even down to the language on the policies themselves. We're not here to give you answers. We're just here to listen, and that's the kind of mode we're going to be in over the next 60 days. So we're going to open up the floor here to get questions. We have you have mics in front of you for those of you at the dais. We also have Hannah who can come over to the mic, and we are streaming this and recording this. So please keep that in mind. That's why we have the mics. Part of that is for our use so that we can revisit some of the comments and make sure we can address them. So I want to open the floor up to have any questions or statements or any issues. No. And to turn the mics on here, there's a little button and you'll see a green light come on. So
okay, got it. My name is Jay Hellman. often introduce myself as an overeducated real estate developer. My overeducation is in math and computer science, and in 1980, I was building downtown office buildings, and I could foresee the evolution of computer and communication technology, and I said, this is going to change the world. I spent a year and a half just thinking about it, as though I was going back to school and writing another dissertation, and I came up with an insight in the relationship between time and space and human behavior. And if you think about how patterns of land use have changed as a function of technology, it's a function of transportation technology changes. For most of evolution, only two things move, ships and feet. So where were cities? Where ships could get to them. Where'd you live? How far could you walk? So if you look at the old historic plans, I mean, even George Washington's 10 by 10 mile, there were two grids, Alexandria and Georgetown, as little places that people lived and functioned. Well, then we invented rail, and then we, in a sense, created inland harbors, and we had pedestrian patterns of land use. Today we call it TOD, as though it's a new idea. But we've been through all hell breaking loose with the automobile, changing radically patterns of land use. The thing that's missing in your environmental analysis is a recognition that a more enlightened use of the capabilities of technologies, not just like this, although there's more computing power right here than used to fill buildings when I was in college. And those were buildings that you had to have air conditioning under the floor to keep the computers cool. And so we're all going to have screens like this. And we're all going to have fiber running to all buildings. So the term I invented to describe that new world is virtual adjacency. Right now, the people in this room are physically adjacent. To be physically adjacent, you transport bodies. To be virtually adjacent, you transport information, and we'd be like Captain Kirk having a video conversation with somebody life-size. So what I want to do is I want to suggest that instead of thinking about things as subsets, as though you can do a workplace module and you could do an environment module and you could do a transportation module, the real world is in fact an interconnected dynamic feedback system. That was one of my areas of overeducation, was a PhD in complex systems. But what I've been doing in this area to be a model for the country is taking a bedroom community, in this case in southern Maryland, La Plata, the county seat of Charles County, and transforming it from a bedroom community to a telecommunity. And what that would mean is instead of living here and wasting 3 hours a day commuting back and forth to a job, you could live here and you could work here. And you would still go to Washington or other places from time to time, but the physical nexus with another person is a strategic, it's like the extreme of communication. The two extremes are the written letter and the face-to-face meeting. And we've invented a lot of things between them, and as these technologies keep getting better, the quality of the things we've invented between them keep getting better. So I want to suggest that the phrase that had been bandied about when Al Gore was vice president and Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House was reinvent government and NII. How many people know what the acronym NII means? If we used it, we'd know. It's National Information Infrastructure. There are 4 fiber optic networks running down Route 301 through La Plata right now. Now, I started on La Plata in 1986, so I mean, it takes an unbelievably long time to get people. It took me 13 years to get the town to do a vision plan. I said, you're not going to defeat random hodgepodge sprawl if what you do is 5-year comprehensive planning. Because when you make road, water, and sewer decisions, you're making 100-year infrastructure decisions. You need a context to be able to make 100-year decisions. So one of the great things about what you guys are trying to do is you're really trying to think at the larger, more inclusive scale. And I'm trying to actually suggest even what you're trying to do is not quite as global, dynamic, and interconnected as it needs to be. But, for example, what DHS is doing now on St. Elizabeth, trying to build the equivalent of another Pentagon, that's a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem. And so there are things about this that I've created on a website, one called Virtual Adjacency, and then the other one for La Plata dealing with virtual adjacency, vision planning, and telecommunity.
Okay.
But I'll share more of this with you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But I'd like to encourage people to do what Mark Twain said: you can't depend on your eyes when your imagination is out of focus. And what we need now is we need imagination and then courage.
I don't think we would disagree with that at all. So, no, in terms of the policies themselves, or any ideas you have for rewording them or whatever, or eliminating the elements, we'd love to hear that. So,
my name is Gail Black, and I'm a resident here in Washington, also an ANC commissioner. In looking at this, there were a few comments. Number one, you're talking about the stormwater management. That's near and dear to my heart, and I was really listening closely to what you were saying about climate change. I live near Rock Creek Park, and we have unbelievable flooding. It's a federal park, and I'm wondering what can we do? We've got some of the fish coming back now, but the issues and the ground contamination is scary. So one comment with regard to your point about meeting federal standards. Right now, the federal government doesn't address many of the contaminants that I think we should be concerned with. Upgrading the water supply, how do we do that when, where I live, I'm in a combined storm sewer area? And I never hear or see anything that's really specifically addressing that. It's always, okay, in 30 years, we'll get to you. That raises some environmental justice issues, and I'm not sure how to fit that in here, but I just want to plug that in. The Anacostia is one river, but we have 29, I understand, overflows when it's just a half an inch of rain. So if you're talking about greater rain events, that is really very, very scary for Ward 4 because we have a lot of seniors, individuals with disabilities, families, young kids. We think it's a great area, but what are we really doing to address the outdated system that we've got? And I realize money is a concern, but what's the federal government doing? The last comment is when you say you want to avoid the use of the pesticides going into the water supply, well, the first thing the federal government can do is stop approving the requests that come in to have more discharges into our streams. So those are preliminary comments.
okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm Robert Hershey.
Oh.
I'm an engineer in the District of Columbia, past president of the DC Society of Professional Engineers. One thing I'd like to comment on in what has been presented today is what you're claiming is light pollution. Mm-hmm. In past decades, people had pointed to a vibrant city as one that is lit up, like New York, or to some extent like DC was becoming. And this is going in the opposite direction. The lighting, though one might see it spilling into other areas, as long as it isn't particularly disturbing a neighbor, which might be a nuisance thing as opposed to a citywide campaign, is good. That the lighting helps in improving security, and there have been plans in many cities to increase street lighting to prevent crime. Mm-hmm. Also, when planes fly over DC, this is an inspiring sight to look out the window of your plane and see all the lights. And this is a feature of your plan to shut that down and not have any light going up. If you're worried about light on the borders of the mall competing with the mall, most of these are federal facilities, and that's something within the federal government to take care of what they're going to do with their own facilities. If they want the mall to stand out more, they should tell their other facilities to do their lights accordingly. But I don't see this as an overall initiative to get all these lights down. Thank you.
No, I agree. And I think that the what we're trying to achieve with the light pollution is definitely a balance. We would certainly not want to compromise safety or any of the good qualities of the city. So I think we need to work on the wording for that.
Hello, I'm Susan Haree, and I'm an architect and planner. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm going to bring up a topic that is not my area of expertise at all, but it's something that I'm aware of, and it's basically called waste to energy. The closed loop type systems that are being used in Germany, I think at Munich Airport. In England, I understand there are about 6 or 7 waste to energy plants, and then there's one really large one in Copenhagen. And it's a way to use waste instead of taking it to landfills. There's no emissions of any kind because it's a closed loop system, and it goes into some kind of gasification process that is basically then usable for energy. And because of the work that I do, I'm rather aware of things going on across the U.S., and I think this is something that we should be picking up on, and I don't see it happening anywhere. And I think it's a wonderful thing that can be implemented at smaller scales, district scales. So I thought I'd raise the issue.
So it's basically utilizing waste to create energy. Is that essentially
Right.
the concept of it?
Right. And if you're interested, I have literature and I can give it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Did they look at district? Oh, okay. Anybody else have any questions? Any issues you want to raise?
I got one other one which took me 10 years to figure out. You talked about trees and tree canopy and the like.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very important to recognize that cities are not forests. I mean, the number one health problem in this country is obesity. The cheapest remedy is just walk more. So my other innovation, besides creating, turning bedroom communities into telecommunities, is changing how we regulate land use within walking distance of rail stations, so that we can enable more people to function just by walking. Well, you know what the first thing planners do when they think they get the idea of TOD? They have an absurd discussion as to how far is walking distance so they can draw a circle on a map. Have you any idea how far you walk when you're in a city you actually enjoy walking in? You walk miles. Why? Because every step you took was interesting and there was something to do, and you bumped into people, you could go into stores, and the buildings you looked at were basically well designed and they were pretty. We don't write zoning to do that. I got a bill, it took me 7 years to figure this out. I got a bill introduced in Annapolis called State Rail Station Overlay Districts. And the reason Annapolis is land use regulation is a state power, not a federal power. But land use regulation was delegated to localities about 100 years ago. Well, the population of Maryland 100 years ago, Montgomery County was 30,000 people. Prince George's County was 28,000 people. Today they're both pushing 1 million. So it's a radically different world today than it was. But land use regulation has been so micro-minutia that nobody's thinking at the systems level. And you really need to think of a rail system as a horizontal elevator, and land within walking distance of every station is a different floor in the same building. And where it really struck home and hit me, I was at a Coalition for Smarter Growth meeting one evening. We started in Prince George's Plaza on the Green Line near College Park. That was the first half of the meeting. The second half of the meeting was in Columbia Heights. How did we get from Prince George's Plaza to Columbia Heights? Got on the Green Line, and it was like 5 minutes, and from Prince George's Plaza, you're at Columbia Heights. I said, who in their right mind thinks of that lake, that area of Prince George's County and that part of DC as only 5 or 10 minutes apart. So I want to suggest that you really start to think of the world in 2 dimensions, time and space, and think about how technology changes the relationship of places in time and space. Because Prince George's Plaza and Columbia Heights being 5 or 10 minutes apart is in nobody's brain except people who happen to be within walking distance of those rail stations and have actually used the metro. But our rail stations in the suburbs are all hostile to pedestrian. We're suffering it right now in Noma. Do you know what the big problem in Noma is today? Noma is north of Mass Ave. It's an area that was an industrial part of DC that was rezoned about 10 or 12 years ago to basically become downtown. And if you go to, and the big first tenant was a federal tenant.
ATF, yeah.
It was
ATF.
ATF. Well, I had renovated a little old warehouse building, because that used to be warehouses there, and I turned it into a nightclub. Well, I needed a parking variance because a warehouse building has no parking, but they were building the new Florida Avenue Metro station, and we already had a street grid, so that the planners in DC felt they didn't really have to do urban planning. You know what they figured out about 2 or 3 years ago? We don't have any parks. You look at the L'Enfant plan, and you look at the grid, and you see McPherson Square, you see Franklin Square, you see Franklin, what's the other one? It's McPherson, Franklin, Farragut Square, and then you have the circles. But you've got really nice urban parks in a street grid. In Noma, you got nothing. Mm-hmm. And they figured it out now, and every site in Noma, almost every one is under construction right now, and the question is, okay, where are we going to put a park? Well, one of our problems is we have these arbitrary height limits. What if we could build some buildings taller and thinner and create some more space between buildings to create much better urban design and walkability? And fit little buildings amongst the tall buildings, which is what I did at Lafayette Center on 20th Street between L and M. So I want to encourage you to rethink height limits. I mean, we're a city of short, fat buildings. Now, that doesn't mean every building should be tall, but we need to have design review and a philosophy and spirit. So what I loved a lot about your talk was you really focused on spirit, intent, philosophy. You wanted to encourage creative thinking, and that's exactly what my state rail station overlay district bill does. I had 2.5 pages of whereas clauses. They said, we don't do legislation like that. I said, the whereas clauses are the most important part of this bill. Anytime you write numbers, you're probably wrong. Anyway, so I want to encourage you to be thinking at that.
No, I appreciate that, absolutely.
Taller, so I started me with trees. So I came up with, after I figured out the relationship between computer and communication technology and office buildings, I picked a little old building on Pennsylvania Avenue at 7th Street that was devoid of people and glass in the windows. It was pigeon inhabited. It was the old Apex building. Mm-hmm. And in 1982, what is today Market Square was a chain link fence surrounding rubble because Can's department store had burned down. But when the riots hit this city in '68, the east part of the city died. Mm-hmm. So here I am standing on Pennsylvania Avenue looking at this little gem of a building with no people in it. And if you're standing on the west side of the building looking east, you're looking at the U.S. Capitol and you're looking at the Apex building. In order for me to take the picture, I had to stand in the middle of the street. Because if I stood on the sidewalk, all you would have seen was sidewalk and trees. You wouldn't have seen the Capitol. I said, if you've got a sidewalk with a view of the most important building in America, maybe trees is the wrong landscape architecture. Maybe it should be flowers, and it should be neat green things, but that work like a picture frame. Nobody would put the nicest piece of wood across the face of the Mona Lisa and call it a picture frame because it was a nice piece of wood. So what I want to suggest is our misunderstanding of trees is life on Earth does not depend on the urban street tree. The Amazon rainforest, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's good. So you're saying that the trees should reflect the context. I mean, they shouldn't.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And it's not, and so I don't want you to get so caught up in micro minutia that you miss the big stuff.
Yeah, we don't. That's definitely what the comp plan doesn't want to do.
And the experience of place is absolutely critical.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kent Slowinski. I am a landscape architect. I worked for the firm that did one of the preliminary designs for the Pennsylvania Avenue Redevelopment Corporation. So I'd like to put in a good word for the Willow Oaks on Pennsylvania Avenue. I think they serve their purpose. I'm also an ANC commissioner in Wesley Heights. It's up by American University. We include Spring Valley, Palisades, Foxhall. The section on solid waste and hazardous materials management, it doesn't include any references to cleanup of Superfund sites. That's a federal program. The Pentagon is the single largest polluter in the world, larger than the six next largest polluters combined. The neighborhood in which I grew up is Spring Valley. Next year we celebrate, or we mark the 20th anniversary of the Army Corps' cleanup in Spring Valley. I think DC has approximately a half dozen other contaminated sites. The Naval Yard, another Superfund site. I think the District of Columbia needs to take the lead in playing the role of state regulator on many of these sites, especially Spring Valley. But Superfund program needs to be fully funded too. Changing the topic, going from the parks of Noma to the parks of Wesley Heights, we are fortunate to have several national park sites: Glover Archibald, Battery Kimball, Whitehaven, C&O Canal, and Wesley Heights Park. We're forming a group called the Parks Conservancy to encourage people to get more involved in stewardship. And it's clear the National Park Service cannot do everything by themselves. They've launched a recent effort to get more people involved, volunteering in our national parks, doing invasive plant removal, park cleanups, primarily through the Alice Ferguson Foundation's Potomac River Watershed Cleanup. We need more park partnerships like that. I'd encourage the federal government to organize, to have the agencies volunteer, adopt parks, and to go out and work with groups such as the Parks Conservancy, the Rock Creek Conservancy, excuse me, Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy, Little Falls Watershed Alliance. There are already groups that encourage, well, what is it, DC Cares. They organize community involvement days where businesses can sign up and they can have hundreds of employees come out to work on neighborhood issues. I think if the federal government were involved in a project like that, it would have a major impact. In our redistricted ANC, we're going to be adopting or taking on the Homeland Security's Naval Security Station, also known as the Nebraska Avenue Complex. And I applaud the National Capital Planning Commission for requiring a stormwater management plan for the Nebraska Avenue Complex. That is something that has a direct impact on Glover Archibald Park. One of the first things we're going to be doing with the Parks Conservancy is we're trying to get the main trail in Glover Archibald Park named in honor of Rachel Carson, who was featured in a Life magazine article approximately 50 years ago, this September. It will be the 50th anniversary of the publication of Silent Spring, which some people say marks the birth of the beginning of the environmental movement. So we're trying to get the main trail named in honor of Rachel Carson. DC Water is planning a major sewer rehab project in Glover Archibald. They're going to be relining the sanitary sewers, taking out some of the lateral sewer lines that cross Foundry Branch. They're going to be putting in flexible pipe so that there's no barrier to fish migration in Foundry Branch. They're also planning on daylighting Foundry Branch, which is a major step in the right direction. It's a 3-mile stream that flows from Tenleytown south to the Potomac, just west of Georgetown University. But this is something that I talked to some people at DDOE about approximately 4 or 5 years ago. And they said, you know, it's not a 1 or 2 or 5-year project, maybe not even a 10-year project, but maybe 20-year project. Here we are, 5 years later, they're talking about daylighting Foundry Branch. This is great news. If there's anything we can do to make this process, to streamline the process, to make it easier, because I know the district has been struggling with daylighting Broad Branch. It's been on the books for 5, 6 years now and hasn't gone anywhere. And that's less than a quarter mile. We're dealing with 3 miles of stream in Glover Archibald Park. So volunteers in the park, that would be a great step in the right direction. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your comment about the Superfund sites as well. We'll look to research that. As far as the park partnerships go, I think we might be able to address some of that in this. We also have a parks and open space element, which we're looking to update, which we really want to get into that stuff in that part of the comp plan as well. So,
yeah. I'd like to put in a good word for the new superintendent of Rock Creek, Tara Morrison. Major improvement. We look forward to working with her. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Just a few more things that I didn't see in here, but they may be here and I just have overlooked them. Okay. And they're out, just tick them off very quickly. 5, leaking underground storage tanks.
Oh.
There are quite a few, I understand, within a half a mile of my home, which probably suggests when American University area was mentioned, that's where I went to school, so I know a little bit about Spring Valley there. Lyme disease, West Nile virus, the CDC type issues that seem to come and go, and I don't know if people really realize the extent of it. The manhole fires that are often taking place underground, so people don't realize the gas, the dangers there with explosions. We won't even get into Pepco and the electrical grid, because I'm not sure how much is urban myth and how much is true, but people are worried about everything from smart meters to the cell towers that are in the neighborhoods. But the greatest, I think, we shouldn't forget about traffic gridlock in D.C., because that has to be one of the huge environmental hazards to us. It's causing air quality issues. And transit is just not the panacea. So I hope that we do have, I'm for smart growth in a way that serves all of us. So.
Okay.
I'd like to add on to the transportation issue. The Nebraska Avenue complex is involved in the NEPA process, coming up with a master plan. And I'm sitting next to the traffic engineer who's involved in that project. One of the findings was that approximately 50% of the people coming to work at the Nebraska Avenue complex will be coming from Virginia. So they'll be coming across Key Bridge or Chain Bridge and coming up Canal Road or Foxhall Road or Arizona Avenue or Loughborough Road. The traffic studies didn't include looking at that impact, so it's important to include that in any traffic management plan. But perhaps it would make more sense to locate part of the Nebraska Avenue complex somewhere in Virginia where these workers are coming from, so you'd avoid the traffic issues. Thanks.
I'm just going to talk off my head. When we talk about transportation issues, you have the issue of idling tour buses. It's a $500 fine if a bus idles over 3 minutes. It is not being enforced at all. I live in Southwest, and we are loaded with tour buses. Every time they come down to get on a ship, and which, of course, you know, the Southwest waterfront development is supposedly going ahead. We have additional tour boats which use diesel primarily. We have, if you have additional tour boats, you're going to have additional charter buses to pick up the chartered boat people. So it's that's a huge issue as far as the idling tour busing, and the law is not being enforced. It's on the books. It's just not being enforced. So something should be done on that.
Yeah, we don't. NCPC doesn't get involved in the enforcement of that, but we definitely recognize tour buses are an issue in terms of finding a place where they can go, because they do need to idle somewhere.
No, they don't need to idle.
Or wherever they need to go in between their stops and everything like that. And I think we've worked with the city in the past on that issue, and I think we'd like to get involved and do it again at some point. So.
Okay, but that is part of our air pollution and water pollution and everything else, because I used to live on a boat, and you could just see the gray matter on your boat, and it's coming from helicopters, it's coming from the airport, it's coming from boats, it's coming from buses.
Okay, does anybody else have any other comments? Okay, again, the 60-day public comment period runs until August 10th. Everything is up on our website at ncpc.gov //comp plan. But if you go to our site, you can click to it pretty quick. We'd love to hear any comments that you have. They go directly to staff. And the way we kind of do this is as we finalize the element, we will respond to all the comments in writing on the website before we final it. We did that with the transportation element. And we'd love to hear any ideas or comments you may have. So thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it.